manufacturing in India and employing more people in that process, even if it means paying more. Because, the other side of the argument, Raghu, we always hear is, my God, even the idols of gods we buy in Indian markets are made in China.
Right.
Why hasn't the government prevented that? Why can't our traditional artisans and sculptors and everybody else be getting this business that now is all going to China? So the question often is that there is a certain value to some things being done in your own country.
Right. I was reading about that. We were complaining about idols being manufactured in Japan in the 1930s. We've just changed the country we complain about. Well, if they manufacture the idols in a reasonable way, it's good. The question is, are there other things that we could do? Do we have to force the manufacturing of idols in India? Or are there things we could do more effectively? And that's the question we should be asking. Put differently, how much does it cost us to get these jobs into India? And are they highly skilled jobs or are they low-skilled assembly jobs? If they're low-skilled assembly jobs where you're not paying these workers very much, do we need that amount of subsidy to get that in? What is the per worker cost of doing this? Now, you would be amazed when the US applied tariffs to keep steel worker jobs in the US. It was realized the cost per job was $300,000 for keeping those jobs. So tariffs are not innocuous. When you raise them and force the customers to pay more, you're forcing, 500 million Indians who buy these cell phones to pay for those 5,000 jobs that are created. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot for the 500 million Indians, but you put 20% per cell phone, add it up, divide it by 5,000 jobs. It's a lot to pay for those 5,000 jobs. So the amazing thing I have discovered is nobody in India, nobody in government has done a study on this, has actually found how much it costs to create these jobs. And of course, we don't know yet whether these jobs will stay once the subsidies are lifted and once the tariffs are lifted. The worry I have, and this is why I say experiment before you roll out. We're rolling it out in a big way.
Yeah.
Now we're doing 10 billion for chip manufacturing. We don't even know what kind of chips we'll get for 10 billion. Now, chip manufacturing is a very capital intensive business.
That's right.
And countries are putting 30, 40, 50 billion at it and still not being satisfied. Intel wants that 50 billion that the US government is putting, even though it has state-of-the-art factories already. Because to make the next leap, it has to do far more. The worry I have in all this is in these kinds of very capital-intensive manufacturing, the number of jobs you're going to create is a pittance. Any chip factory is going to take maybe 500 people, 1,000 people. And it's not even clear you become self-sufficient because the critical problem is not the low-quality chips. It's the high-quality chips. If you're doing defense equipment, you need those high-quality chips. You're not going to be able to manufacture those at, even with a 10 billion
I think we
subsidy.
sort of saw the Chinese moving into that area and said, my gosh, if they can do it, why can't we? Because you remember there was a time in the 70s and 80s when China was practically manufacturing nothing of their own. Everything was imitative, and this was something too complicated to imitate. Now they're actually world leaders. The Taiwanese and the Chinese together have pretty much cornered 80-90% of the semiconductor chip manufacturing process.
The Chinese are not at the frontier yet. They're behind. And that's why they want Taiwan. Because with Taiwan, they get to the frontier. But the Chinese have spent 50 to 100 billion in the last couple of years on trying to get more chip manufacturing. And they're still not at the frontier. So if you want to play this game, the amount that you have to spend
is not worth the cattle.
10 billion will get you nothing. Yeah. But 10 billion will get us 200 high-quality universities. Do we want those 200 high-quality universities, or do we want, one big factory somewhere?
Fair point. Okay, so then let's just move on from that particular argument to one of the solutions. You gave us a diagnosis and a prescription. One of them was, let's improve our production of and export of services. But again, there is a question of how many jobs can you create in services? And secondly, have you skilled enough people to provide the services that the world now needs. And in both questions, I fear there is a particular challenge.
It is a challenge. It's not going to be easy. But I would say, therefore, let's start today. Let's start investing far more in things like education, in things like healthcare, than we are doing. Recognizing that our people are going to be our greatest strength. And therefore, I mean, that's why I'm saying, I find the complete neglect of this fact that our children have missed 2 years. And Pratham or Acer basically says 2 years in school that you missed means you're 4 years behind because you've forgotten also in the 2 years that you were there. So our kids, that cohort, that entire cohort, except for the ones in really good schools with access to, iPads and computers, the rest actually are failing at this point. And to rescue them, we need a substantial amount of investment in remedial education. And we're not doing that. We're going to push them up. They'll keep getting promoted, but they won't understand anything in class. We'll get more dropouts. Tamil Nadu had 500,000 kids dropping out. They had to be coaxed back into class. I don't know if we're doing surveys like that elsewhere in the country, but if we're not, we risk a lost generation. And so I would argue, start first with saving our existing kids, then work on increasing their opportunity to do far better. They should have access to many more high quality colleges, many more high quality schools with the right labs, with the right supports. And thereby, we can actually increase the quality of our human capital significantly. And that's going to be where we create the jobs. Think about a university. I work with a university in the South today.
Which one?
Kriya. It's a new university. University employs maybe 120 faculty. It employs another 300, 400 support staff, right? And with that, you're training kids to get a bachelor's degree. Those kids will go out and get a whole set of new jobs because they're now trained up to world standards. Some of them will go for higher education, but many of them can become your consultants, your supports to investment banks and so on. Those kids will create another 5, 6 jobs apiece. So my sense is, manufacturing provides far less when you think about it. That, little unskilled assembly is something that, yes, provides jobs, but doesn't provide growth. And the kind of growth-providing manufacturing that one can have is very limited.
Well, the other challenge I've noticed is that technology also overtakes some of our success stories. Now, you remember the time when medical transcription was a big sunrise industry, and we cornered 90% of the world market on that. Here you had American doctors dictating their notes at the end of the day into a computer, and it was zinged over to India while the American was asleep, and some fairly qualified Indian chap transcribed the whole thing and sent it back. And when the American woke up in the morning, his notes were there, complete and accurately typed. Much cheaper and more effective than hiring a secretary. And then comes voice recognition software, and suddenly the American doesn't need the guy in India. He can just dictate into his computer and it understands his accent and reads, types out for him automatically. Now, suddenly a business where India thought they were thriving, where we had mushrooming companies being established and people investing in homes and cars expecting to have this job for the next 25 years, suddenly they're all unemployed and the companies are out of business. Now, that's the kind of challenge for which I don't know whether we have enough answers in India. But how would you tackle that kind of phenomenon if you were making policy?
Every country has that problem. And the thing is obviously to keep adapting, right? To keep adapting to what the new needs are. And that means constant learning. So Scandinavia, these are countries that are small, that are buffeted by trade shocks every few years. And what they do is they try and keep their workers constantly learning. So you're here today. What is it that you need to learn? What is it that you need to learn to keep your skills up? What are the forces that are coming to hit you? That is called an active labor market. Now, we're very far from that. But the question is, if we want to succeed in this world which is dynamic, where things are changing all the time, We have to be able to impart new skills all the time, even when those skills aren't currently needed. You have to remember your job will become obsolete in 5 years, given the pace of change. So take radiologists, right?
They used to be reading MRIs from America, and now they're no longer needed, right?
Well, but even in the US, right, MRIs now can be read by machine because AI is increasingly developing capabilities. That said, what the doctor there does is provide the last view. What is happening still is nobody trusts the machine to get it right. So the machine provides the input to the doctor, who at the end determines whether this is right or not. There is still a last channel. But it does mean that, increasingly there will be less space for doctors doing that particular activity, because the machine does most of the analysis, and the doctor finally decides whether it's right or not, which means we have to retrain in something else. Now, there's no dearth of demand for medical services in the US, right? Try getting a doctor, it takes you, 3 months to get a doctor's appointment. So the demand is very high. And that's why I'm saying making it easier to provide those services, whether at a distance or by machine, there's still plenty of demand for that kind of thing.
Well, there's also some demand for one very old-fashioned thing we're doing reasonably well at even today, and that's medical tourism. We do operations of high quality, cheaper, and we look after patients better than most Western hospitals can do. And we are actually attracting people to come just to have their hips replaced or their knees replaced or even bypasses done in India for a fraction of what it would cost them, and with swifter appointments than they would get on the West.
Absolutely, which is why I'm saying, why don't we negotiate with the US and with the UK? Not just about we'll keep, we want to protect our culture and this and that. But talk about them paying for patients who come to India to get their hip replacement. Talk about national insurance paying for these kinds of services. That, to my mind, will be an advance. We will get a lot more demand for our hospitals, and of course, it'll be win-win. But when we think about services, I'm not talking just about the kind of services that are high value-added services. Tourism is a service which is very, very important. We can do far more of that. But again, tourism requires us to have a liberal image. Not that we're a harsh, oppressive government, but we are a liberal government which loves everybody from across the world. We invite everybody.
And we look after them well when they come.
And we look after them well. This is our historical reputation. It would be a shame to lose it. I think it's very important to convey that kind of image. Another service is construction. Construction is another service. And we need a lot of construction. We are seeing some attempt to do what is necessary, but there's far more that can be done. Homes for the poor, various Awas Yojanas. There is various roads, ports, airports.
But that's Indians doing things in India for other Indians.
That is also part of the services. What I'm saying is there's so much we can do with services. And let's focus on manufacturing because that's the way to go, and let's pay what it takes to get it done. I think we need to at least test that hypothesis.
Well, sir, that's been a profound insight I think we've all gained from this excellent lecture and conversation. I've got 3 members of the audience who have asked for the floor with questions. So let me go to them one by one. When I call out your name, if you don't mind standing up so they can hand you a mic and you can read out your question. First is Uwais Ali Khan. I think right there. Who has a mic, Alam?
Mic will come to you. Can you get the mic there, please?
And just for all the other colleagues, Uwais, can you tell us which chapter you've come from of AIPC and what you do, and then ask your question. You have to press some button, I think, to make it work.
Try it now.
Alam, this should have been taken care of earlier.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rajan, Dr. Tharoor. First of all, warm welcome to the National Conclave of All India Professionals Congress. I am Uwais Ali Khan, Chartered Accountant by profession, and also the Secretary of Uttar Pradesh West Professionals Congress, and also heading the Finance Professionals Vertical of All India Professionals Congress. Sir, we are discussing the challenges and problems in Indian economy these days almost at every level. My question from you is, if you were the finance minister of the country at present, which we wish soon you became, what key steps you would have taken to reclaim our lost economic glory? Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Raghu, if you don't mind, shall we take all three questions? Because the clock has ticked past 1:30. Rukshmani Kumari. Right in the front row here, can you pass the mic? And third will be Venkatram Reddy, if he can also stand up and show where he is. There he is. So the mic has to go back there afterwards.
Welcome, sir. I'm Rukshmani Kumari, and I head the All India Professionals Congress for Rajasthan. I have a question for you, sir. I wanted to tell you about me. I run an NGO called Star Foundation, and I also run hotel. So my question is, if China succeeds without liberal democracy, and India has fallen behind despite having liberal democracy, then how can you argue that liberal democracy is essential to successful economic growth?
Excellent. We get some philosophical questions in there. And the last one, Mr. Venkatram Reddy, right at the back. Somebody could take the mic to him, please.
He's got it.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm from AIPC, Telangana. I have a question, sir. We are talking about manufacturing, less manufacturing and more of services. But are we ignoring the big market we have here in India itself? Today, protectionism is a big thing everywhere. And what if it's not that we have a demand, and what if the supply would not come to us? Not having a strong manufacturing base, would it impact us in the long term in that sense? Thank you.
So those three questions, perhaps, Raghu, before we break for lunch.
Yeah. So start first with, do you need a manufacturing base? I'm not saying do away with it. I'm saying don't mollycoddle it. Going back to the infant industry, we need to protect it. We need to, these were the old arguments that were made. I would say by all means, we should have manufacturing. Whatever we can do, which is sensible, makes sense, we should do it. But let's not overly subsidize it. Let's figure out what we need to spend on. And that leads to the question, shouldn't we be spending more on education, on healthcare, so that we create more human capital in the country? And that can then either do more manufacturing, but I would argue that can also go into services. Certainly the world needs more services, but India also needs more services. So I'm not saying do away with manufacturing, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is, if you want to put your spending, which basket do you put your spending in? Do you subsidize the manufacturers and do you sort of protect them? Or do you try and encourage more human capital building in the country? And I would say the latter rather than the former, which goes back to the first question, which was what, what kind of policies would you follow? I certainly think that one of the most important issues for us today is really how do we encourage more human capital building in the country, right? Which is how do we push more resources to education and healthcare. And that's something we need to think about. And I'm not just saying government spending. How do we get more private sector spending in those areas? For example, if we're talking about healthcare, how do we get the private sector to provide more high quality healthcare? One of the problems often is the private sector provides healthcare, but it's not particularly high quality. So those are the things we need to think about. How do we get more human capital building in the country? On the issue of what else would you do, one of the things we need to really think about is the business environment. How do we make it easier for a small guy to start up in the country and to have a strong business? We just heard about a private entrepreneur. We need so many more of those. Now, everybody is looking for the government to create jobs, but the government can create only a small number of jobs. The reality is much of the jobs have to be created outside the government. And big business is not creating too many jobs. It has to be created by small enterprises growing big. How do we create the environment which allows for that? And that's why I'm saying we need to move away from the top down, these are the industrialists I'm going to favor, these are the ones I'm going to help, to how do I create the environment, the business environment that allows a lot more people to flourish? How do I give them certainty that they will not be troubled by a tax inspector? They will not be troubled by somebody who asks to inspect their boilers? How do I tell them which rules they have to obey? How do I make it easier for them to get finance? Those are the things. We need to think about how to encourage small business in this country much more than we're doing today. So that is another thing I would focus on. On the, we could go on, but I need to answer the last question. Your question was, why do you think liberal democracy? I would argue we've had an imperfect liberal democracy. And I would say the clear example of it not working is how little we spent on education in the first so many years. If you look at the first 3 decades of India, our education attainments were miserable. We didn't improve the quality of the years of schooling significantly. If you think about the one big difference between China and India, when they started liberalizing, China started liberalizing in early 80s, India in the late 80s. The big difference was China had people with much greater schooling than India had. For India, it was liberalization which helped create the jobs that required more schooling. People looked for more schooling, and that happened. But in China, they had already been educated by the communist system to much higher levels of education. There was a huge difference. And so I would argue we had a democracy, but it wasn't working in the broader interests of people. Over time, it has done more of that, but we need to ensure that keeps going by strengthening our democracy, by making sure it works for the people rather than it works for a narrow elite. And that's the work we need to do.
But even if one agrees with that point, China's success is still a repudiation of the democratic evangelists, isn't it? Because they really don't have a democracy at all in any meaningful sense of the term. And yet they have grown and outstripped every other democracy.
So I would argue the following, and you can hold me to this. I think we've seen peak China. That China has benefited tremendously from what they did right on encouraging manufacturing. But now they have to make the next step, which is a service-oriented economy. And that's where I think some of the advantages of democracies will come in. The fact that there are checks and balances, the fact that the government cannot determine everything. One of the problems with China today, of course, is that President Xi has some very set views on the direction China has to take. And those views, even the zero COVID policy, but before that, the policy against the private sector and the attack on the private sector.
On the bigwigs in the private sector.
Bigwigs in the private sector was popular, but the broader, we should determine what is good, what is not, has the old central planning view. And my sense is those are things which sort of hit against what made China successful so far. And therefore, I would say, unless China sort of rediscovers a new path, the old path has reached its limits. And as a result, growing further in this direction may be really difficult. Now, people have called time on China many times and been wrong. But I would argue that China has reached the limits of that manufacturing-led growth. Even for political reasons, the West is not willing to accept anymore.
That's right. And in any case, you don't have a track record of being proved wrong. You've actually been pretty right in most of what you said. Colleagues, sorry, we are going to extend this slightly. Alam is saying that 4 colleagues from 4 different states have again asked for the floor with questions. I think I don't want to deprive ourselves of Raghu's wisdom. So we'll just extend it by a few more minutes, and I'll take your 4 questions and ask Raghu to give us quick answers. So the first one is Kranti Naidu from AIPC Andhra. Where are you? I'll mention everyone, so you can please just stand up and show yourselves to the mic. Second one is Pradeep Sharma, Special Advisor to CM Chhattisgarh. Where are you, sir? There you are. You already got the mic in your hand? Okay, then let him ask it first. Oh, you've got your mic too? All right, go on, Kranti Naidu. I asked you first. Okay.
So thanks for giving this opportunity. I am Kranti Naidu from AIPC Andhra. Our question is regarding Nyay scheme. How much it is reliable and useful we want to know, sir. Because in our AP also, based on this only, they had started AP Navaratnalu one scheme. It is going on, sir. Based on that, they are giving money directly to the people on different schemes like education, Amavadi scheme like that. Some schemes are there which they are giving directly to the people, and they are not concentrating on other schemes like corporation funds, etc., which they are also useful for the people to become self-reliant, like they can start their own business like that. But they are not concentrating on other schemes, and they are the government is directly giving money to the people. How much it is reliable and how it increases the economy of the state. Now we are debt-driven, and our Andhra Pradesh state is the most debt-driven state in the country now. How nice scheme can overcome this one, and how it is connected? Is any connection between like that?
Yeah, adding
Our
to the
question.
debts of the state. I get you. Pradeep Sharma, Chhattisgarh.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan. It's a very enlightening lecture. My question is that India contributes almost around 8% of minerals in the whole world, whereas we have only 2.5% of contribution of GDP of these minerals in the whole budget of India. So don't you think that still we have lots of scope for mineral-based production systems in this country? One. Second, in the service industries, don't you think that only a huge portion of elite Indian would be benefited rather than the general people?
Thank you, Pradeep. Manish Khanduri, AIPC Uttarakhand. Can you give him the mic on the side?
Behind you.
Hello. Yes. Thank you. As a very quick aside, my name is Manish Khanduri and I'm from Uttarakhand. As a very quick aside, I want to say that I never had the privilege of hearing you speak when I went to the business school that was to the south of Booth. But I can now say that although I never heard you with Dr. Deepak Jain at Kellogg, I have had the privilege of hearing you with Dr. Shashi Tharoor in Raipur, Chhattisgarh. My question to you is, you've already spoken on the subject. Now, it's a very wide-ranging lecture, and you've spoken about social democracy, and you've spoken about service-oriented economy. What is this role you think of possibly of crypto as a technology in driving all of this that you've mentioned? Now, I want to be very careful. I'm not speaking of it as an investment opportunity, nor am I asking you which is the best one, obviously. But essentially, the role of crypto in everything that you've said for a country like India.
And finally, and this is the last question before lunch, if any of you are burning to ask, save it for a later session. Bhushan Bendre Kalyan. Where are you? Oh, there you are.
Can we get the sound? Please have a look.
Hello. 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 Yes. Hello, Dr. Raghuram Rajan ji, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji. I am Advocate Bhushan Bendre, a lawyer from Kalyan and Secretary of Kalyan AIPC. Sir, I have two questions, one for Dr. Raghuram Rajan ji and one for Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji. I'll start with Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji. Sir, Dr. Raghuram Rajan ji gave a mention in his speech about that data is the new oil. We have seen that data have been harnessed so rigorously that even we go and ask for a burger in McDonald's, they first ask about our number and then only they generate the bill. So data privacy is a serious concern. I just want a suggestion from you. I may be wrong, sir. You are very senior and veteran parliamentarian. So can we bring a data protection bill through a private member's bill in the parliament? I know that numerically we are very less in both the houses of the parliament, but still we can create an impact. Even if the bill falls down in the parliament, we can create an impact that, see, we have an intention of protecting the data of this country, but this ruling government doesn't have that kind of intention. This answer I want from you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji. I'll be very glad to hear it from you. And the second one, to Dr. Raghuram Rajan ji, that I have seen that few generations before, my father was a government employee working for a national bank. My grandfather was working for Indian Railways. The recent data have come, which were answered in the parliament by Dr. Jitendra, that the government employments opportunities which were created in the country were only 7 lakh till date 2021-22. And the applications which had come were over 22 crores for government, central government jobs. Sir, can we create something for that? The trend is very dangerous, that since 2014, the government employee have been seriously collapsing like anything. Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharuji, for giving a professional like me an opportunity to be the part of AIPC. I had earlier been very reluctant in the politics, but now I have become very interested in politics. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for that kind word. I must say that this is exactly why we created AIPC, to give professionals like you an outlet and a connection to the political world. I'll quickly answer the question you asked me directly, and I might add that this figure of 7 lakh jobs and 22 crore applications is one that I had come across, was planning to ask you, so I'm glad that Mr. Bendre did. Very simply, I myself have introduced a personal data protection private members bill, first in 2017 and reintroduced it with a new Lok Sabha in 2019. But needless to say, private members bills simply don't take off. That's part of the challenge we have in our politics. The government's data protection bill had a couple of very serious flaws, which we pointed out. But rather than bringing that bill to my committee, the IT committee, which is of course chaired by a congressman, the government preferred to create a select committee chaired by a BJP member, and they were able to outvote us when we opposed that proposal, because obviously we knew it was designed only to take the bill away from an opposition-led committee. That's what our politics has become now. But anyway, to cut a long story short, after 1 year or 2 years, delayed also by COVID, they finally came up with an extensive report, and all the Congress members in that select committee dissented. So we don't have a particularly happy outcome. Since then, that select committee's version of the bill has been sitting with the government for almost a year, and they've done nothing about it. When I spoke to the minister unofficially, so I ask you to treat this as an unofficial statement, his reply was that there were some problems because it would be a powerful disincentive for IT companies to operate in India if the bill as drafted by the committee were to go ahead. So the government was still mulling over how to change the draft. So I think we have a genuine problem, but the bigger problem, as I see as a parliamentarian, is the government is passing other bills day after day, which actually need the underpinning of a data protection bill to keep our consumers safe. For example, the DNA bill. DNA is also data. And if the government can collect and store your DNA every time that you're caught for a speeding offense or anything, what are the laws under which that is going to be preserved? Where are the data protection guarantees? There are no satisfactory answers. I've raised this very question in Parliament. So we need the data protection bill to underpin a whole lot of other legislation that has come and may come in future. But as you say, in the meantime, both the government and the private sector are busy connecting data left, right, and center. They are sort of digging their oil wells on the backs of our information. And some of the basic principles of data protection, that data should belong to he or she who generates it, that once the government has a right to take it for a particular purpose and that purpose is served, thereafter the data should be destroyed or returned to the person who owns it, that if there is a dispute, there should be an independent data protection authority. The government has only proposed one, where the data protection authority is not independent but is made up of government officials. All of these questions, these basic core principles, are so far being bypassed by the government. So whenever the bill comes, there is another worry, which is that we will point all this out in debates on the floor of the House. But because of their brute majority, they'll probably pass a bad bill, and the country will have to live with the consequences. These are the challenges I see in this particular issue. Sorry to give you a dispiriting answer, but I'll get that out of the way and then turn back to Raghu for the 4 economic questions.
So just on those questions, one, is Nyaya a good scheme? Well, no scheme can be divorced from the circumstances in which it is implemented. Generally giving people cash transfers so that they can decide what they want to do with it is a form of empowerment, but also relies on them making good decisions, which typically we found actually happens. So studies generally suggest that people can make those decisions. So I think in general it's a good thing. But then you're asking the question, what if it comes at the expense of other investments the government has to make? And clearly, the government cannot sort of put everything in this basket and not make investments in roads, in ports, and all the other kind of necessary work the government has to do. So this has to be seen as part of the function of the government. And I would say, by and large, the more targeted it is, the more it's going to help particular segments. And therefore, it can be more generous to those segments. Rather than having a thin sort of subsidy to everybody, have it more focused on the truly needy, but sufficient to lift them up in a proper way. I think that, to my mind, would make it more effective. On the notion that minerals, of course, the problem, of course, with many minerals is they are found in tribal areas. And then the question of tribal protection becomes a big issue. What safeguards do we have that their concerns, their livelihoods, their hunting grounds, all those are preserved in a way? What kind of compromise can be reached with them? And I think you understand the issues certainly there. But of course, especially some of the high-value minerals in the country, we certainly should think of ways of exploiting them without impairing the livelihoods of others. I think the point about services being elite is an important one. It doesn't have to be so. That there are lots of services which I think, first, tourism, for example, can go right down to every, to the unskilled level and employ very many people. So we can do far more of those. Yes, there are some elite services, but manufacturing is also becoming elite. Today, much of the when you talk to a Bajaj, there's not a whole lot of workers employed there. Typically, they're people keeping the machines running. That's a highly skilled job. So manufacturing has also become elite, but I would say services has the ability to spread across much more. Because in fact, if we have the ability to lift people up through reasonable schooling and through a decent university, we can immediately make them capable of getting high quality jobs across the world, especially with working at a distance. However, there is work to be done. A lot of our graduates don't have strong skills because the colleges aren't teaching them adequately. So we need to upgrade the quality of our colleges, our universities, but even before that, upgrade the quality of our schools so that children come out of school waiting to learn more rather than being tired of learning. So lots of work to be done, absolutely, but it doesn't have to be elite. It can be much more broad-based. Cryptocurrencies, I suspect the question is from the perspective of, can cryptos work in improving things like, data, like registries for property and so on? Can crypto be used for, elections? Look, I mean, at the heart of it is the notion that here's a decentralized ledger, doesn't need a central authority, can be operated without that central authority. So there are lots of things that can be applied for. I agree with that notion, but I think before we get to this being the solution to everything, there are in many situations more direct solutions at present. Longer run, perhaps this can reduce costs, but at this point, and I'm saying it's not cryptocurrency, but the underlying technology.
Blockchain.
Blockchain,
you're ledger. But I mean, the difficulty will be that, for example, something like land records, government needs to have some authority to control and be aware of it, whereas blockchain, by definition, is beyond the government's control.
Exactly. So, in other words, a permission system rather than a permissionless system may work, with the permission system being sort of governed by the government. You have a centralized ledger. It's not a decentralized ledger. But that would work as well. In fact, that's maybe the only solution in that case. Last question, government employment. India actually, if you look at the number of government employees relative to the size of the population or to the size of the GDP, is relatively small. But I would argue that what we need is to figure out what kind of government jobs we really need more of. typically they're more at the local level rather than the central or the state level. We need far more local officials to carry out the various programs the government is engaged in. And there we need to also make sure that those officials actually do the work that is required. So that's where I'm talking about decentralization. Decentralization, local government jobs would actually, in my view, be something that could improve the governance in this country. So I agree with the point, we probably need more government jobs, but I wouldn't treat them as government jobs just because we need jobs, but jobs because we need government to do more. And therefore we need to put them in the right places. We can't all, we can't have significantly more jobs in Delhi. It has to be jobs in the local municipality, in the taluka. That's where we need the jobs.
It's a real challenge then. There are other complications we haven't had the time to address. Some of the applicants, in fact, the majority of the applicants are overqualified for the jobs they require. So you'll have, for example, a police constable job requiring a 10th grade pass, and you have PhDs applying for it because they can't get any jobs. And the skill mismatch, or even at least qualification mismatch, has become a serious problem. The other problem is that we have an astonishing tail to teeth ratio in our government. Unlike other governments, we have jobs for chaprasis, for peons to carry files from one desk to another and so on, which actually don't require very high qualifications. But those are the jobs which, by and large, our government is trying to cut down upon and dispense with. But there's natural resistance because too many people are unable to do anything else. So, I mean, these are all aspects of that. It's a very problematic issue on which it'd be wonderful if you or one of your doctoral students could spend some time, because it is, and sarkari naukri has been a dream of every Indian from a poor family.
Well, absolutely. And one of the tragedies in India is precisely these students sitting for exam after exam after exam until they superannuate from being able to give another exam for another government exam. So at age 32, they've given all the exams they can, but now cannot take any more exam. And what do they do at that point? At that point, they start looking for a job in the private sector. I mean, we really need to create more jobs, absolutely.
Well said. I want to just congratulate Raghuram Rajan ji for the extraordinary range and breadth of insights he has shared with us today. I'm sorry I can't take any more questions.
सवाल हिंदी में ले लीजिए सर, बहुत देर से इंग्लिश के सवाल थे।
देखिए, सही बात है, आप तो पूछ सकते थे पहले, लेकिन अब तो 2 बज गया। आपको पता है कि 1:30 बजे सब लोगों को लंच देना,
छोटा सा एक क्वेरी है,
पूरा दिन बिगड़ जाएगा। माफ कीजिए, अब दोपहर को आपको मौका दे दूंगा।
ठीक सर,
मैं आप देखा हूं कि आप कैसे हैं, मैं आपसे आपको मौका दूंगा। Thank you all very much for this extraordinary session, for all those who contributed with their questions, and Raghu for your amazing insights. Thank you very much. Adjourn for lunch. We're going to shorten lunch by 15 minutes, so you can be back in half an hour to resume.
Ladies and gentlemen, just so that you know, you can exit on the right over here, on this side, for your lunch. It's all the way there in the back. We also have a photo opportunity session with the chairman. Today, that will be with the AIPC East and West zones. Tomorrow, North and South. Today is AIPC East and AIPC West. Your coordinators will be there to help you.